Welcome again to Ignatius Press Off the Shelf. We're going to conclude our discussion of G.K. Chesterton, Everlasting Man, with his conclusion. Before we get there, I want to remind you that next session we'll be discussing The Wedding of Magdeburg by Gertrude von der Port, an extraordinary book, and Vivian will lead that discussion. And I want to make a comment, Joseph. We talked last session about Chesterton referring to Mr. Smith of Golders Green. And
Yeah.
I have the passage here in C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, which we should probably discuss that sometime. Anyway, chapter 12 of this, as Lewis with MacDonald, his guide, is getting further and further into the beginning of paradise, Lewis writes, some kind of procession was approaching us, and the light came from the persons who composed it. There's a woman who's on this carriage. Only partly do I remember the unbearable beauty of her face. Is it? I whispered to my guide. That is it the Blessed Virgin? Not at all, said he. It's someone you'll never have heard of. Her name on earth was Sarah Smith, and she lived at Golders Green. So when Chesterton refers to Mr. Smith of Golders Green, I mean, I think there may be a unconscious, at least, connection there.
I think that has to be conscious because, Smith and Golders Green together, and we know that Lewis not only read this book, but that was hugely influential upon him. I think that's a deliberate deferential nod in Chesterton's direction.
Mm-hmm. And where is and what is Golders Green?
Well, actually, ironically, it's a Jewish area of North London, and used to be somewhat wealthy because there were so many demographic changes in London since I lived there. I have no idea what it is now, but certainly in the 20th century, it was a Jewish area, a fairly affluent, prosperous area of North London. It's largely Jewish. But obviously, Mr. Smith is not a Jewish name. I suppose Goldsmith might be. I don't know.
And what is a green in terms of Golders Green?
Well, just about every village in England has a village church and a village pub on a village green. So basically, it's just that was the name. That would have been the name of the village, and it was obviously the cluster of buildings around the green, which was probably back in medieval times, common land. That everybody could raise their livestock on, but I think it's pretty frowned upon these days.
And if a village only had one of those three, which would you choose?
Well, I think the inn could double up as a church in extreme circumstances, in extremis.
All right, so my idea for this final session on our beloved GKC was to have a kind of a Chesterton fest in which we used, of the three of us, the one who can read more like Chesterton sounded, namely Joseph here. We would just read some long passages from his conclusion. And I hope you're willing to do that, Joseph. And I wanted to start on page 262. And we can comment, interrupt, whatever, but 262, 4 lines from the bottom, beginning, I doubt whether, going all the way to 266, the fourth line down.
Okay. You said fourth line down?
We're going to let Chesterton summarize Chesterton here.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously feel free to stop me whenever you need a break from my voice as much as anything else.
All right.
Okay. I doubt whether I have clearly fulfilled the plan that I set out in the introductory chapter. And for that reason, I add these lines as a sort of summary in the concluding chapter. I do believe that the things on which I have insisted are more essential to an outline of history than the things which I have subordinated or dismissed. I do not believe that the past is most truly pictured as a thing in which humanity merely fades away into nature, or civilization merely fades away into barbarism, or religion fades away into mythology, or our own religion fades away into the religions of the world.
Pause there for a second.
Short,
Pause for, yeah. That's this idea that looking backward in time, we don't see these blurred transitions where, one thing fades away in a more primitive thing and a more primitive thing and so on. But his claim is just the opposite. You find these sudden leaps, sudden jumps. Okay, go ahead.
Right. Um, in short, I do not believe that the best way to produce an outline of history is to rub out the lines.
Okay, that's it.
I believe that, of the two, it would be far nearer the truth to tell the tale very simply, like a primitive myth about a man who made the sun and stars, or a god who entered the body of a sacred monkey. I will therefore sum up all that has gone before in what seems to me a realistic and reasonably proportioned statement: the short hit story of mankind.
Pause. So again, we're talking about that the charism, the talent of a true historian is not to recount all the facts. There's too many facts to recount. The the great talent of a historian is to pick out those which are salient, those which are significant, those which actually make sense of the movement as an outline. And remember, he's responding here to who is it that did the outline of history?
H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells. Yeah,
And, he says at the beginning, well, he knows much more about history than I do, but he's got the wrong points of reference here. Okay.
yeah.
So now this is the whole book is a short story of mankind. Now the conclusion is a summary of the short story. Okay.
Right, and again, just from what we've just read already here, this is the antidote or the antithesis of H.G. Wells's uh, thesis, which was that the humanity is progressing from basically a barbaric, subhuman, inhuman, non-human past into towards a golden age in the future. Where science will usher in an age where we will no longer need superstitions and religions. So that was basically Wells's thesis, this progressive understanding, which means when you look back, everything gets more and more primitive. And so that's what Chesterton's rebutting here. In the land lit by that neighbouring star, whose blaze is the broad daylight, there are many and very various things, motionless and moving. There moves among them a race that is, in its relation to others, a race of gods. The fact is not lessened, but emphasized because it can behave like a race of demons. Its distinction is not an individual illusion, like one bird pluming itself on its own plumes. It is a solid and a many sided thing.
So it's not speciesism because we are the species Homo sapiens, and therefore we're special.
Right.
Okay.
Which is why it was as gods as opposed to animals, because there's something absolutely different. It is demonstrated in the very speculations that have led to its being denied. That men, the gods of this lower world, are linked with it in various ways is true, but it is another aspect of the same truth. That they grow as the grass grows and walk as the beasts walk is a secondary necessity that sharpens the primary distinction. It is like saying that a magician must, after all, have the appearance of a man, or that even the fairies could not dance without feet. It has lately been the fashion to focus the mind entirely on these mild and subordinate resemblances and to forget the main fact altogether. It is customary to insist that man resembles the other creatures. Yes, and that very resemblance he alone can see. The fish does not trace the fishbone pattern in the fowls of the air, or the elephant and the emu compare skeletons. Even in the sense in which man is at one with the universe, it is an utterly lonely universality. The very sense that he is united with all things is enough to sunder him from all.
So that again, a beautiful summary by Chesterton, because we have minds that can compare ourselves with the whole universe, even though we're part of the universe, that sunders us or makes us distinct and separate from the rest of the universe, the non-human part.
Yeah, there's a passage in this, I can't remember where it is now, that I always talk to my students about, in what sense are we larger than the sun? and the fact that we can see the sun and think about it, the sun's a really inanimate object, however big it is. So I think that's the whole point here.
By
Looking
by the
around
way,
him,
just by the way, that's also why we are more intelligent than artificial intelligence. It can regurgitate facts which it has been fed, but it can't be conscious of them and be aware. It can't know that it's artificial intelligence. Only we can know that. Okay, go ahead.
it doesn't know it's writing a sonnet when you ask it to, for instance.
Exactly.
Right? It's just obeying the rules. Looking around him by this unique light, as lonely as the literal flame that he alone has kindled, this demigod or demon of the visible world makes the world visible. He sees around him a world of a certain style or type. It seems to proceed by certain rules or at least repetitions. He sees a green architecture that builds itself without visible hands, but which builds itself into a very exact plan or pattern, like a design already drawn in the air by an invisible finger. It is not, as is now vaguely suggested, a vague thing. It is not a growth or a groping of blind life. Each seeks an end, a glorious and radiant end, even for every daisy or dandelion we see in looking across the level of a common field. In the very shape of things, there is more than green growth. There is the finality of the flower. It is a world of crowns.
Pause. Okay,
It is,
again, that's such a beautiful symbolic statement there that not green growth, which is the idea of gradual, you know, indecipherable progress as it goes. No, there's suddenly something new there. It's the finality. It's the end. It's the finality of the flower, a world of
yeah,
crowns.
in a
Yeah.
telos, there's a purpose. The finality is its end, right? Its purpose.
Yes,
It is a world of
he's
crowns.
making a metaphysical point in a very simple way that you can see the truth of with these images
Yeah,
of the daisy having being the crown of the end of the plant
yeah,
was to produce flower, to produce the fruit, and so on. Yep.
yeah. This impression, whether or no it be an illusion, has so profoundly influenced this race of thinkers and masters of the material world that the vast majority have been moved to take a certain view of that world. They have concluded, rightly or wrongly, that the world had a plan as the tree seemed to have a plan, and an end and crown like the flower. But so long as the race of thinkers was able to think, it was obvious that the admission of this idea of a plan brought with it another thought more thrilling and even terrible. There was someone else, some strange and unseen being who had designed these things, if indeed they were designed. There was a stranger who was also a friend, a mysterious benefactor who had been before them and built up the woods and hills for their coming, and had kindled the sunrise against their rising, as a servant kindles a fire. Now, this idea of a mind that gives a meaning to the universe has received more and more confirmation within the minds of men by meditations and experiences much more subtle and searching than any such argument about the external plan of the world. But I am concerned here with keeping the story in its most simple and even concrete terms. And it is enough to say here that most men, including the wisest men, have come to the conclusion that the world has such a final purpose and therefore such a first cause. But most men, in some sense, separated themselves from the wisest men when it came to the treatment of that idea. There came into existence two ways of treating that idea, which between them made up most of the religious history of the world. The majority, like the minority, had this strong sense of a second meaning in things, of a strange master who knew the secret of the world. But the majority, the mob or mass of men, naturally tended to treat it rather in the spirit of gossip. The gossip, like all gossip, contained a great deal of truth and falsehood. The world began to tell itself tales about the unknown being or his sons or servants or messengers. Some of the tales may truly be called old wives' tales, as professing only to be very remote memories of the morning of the world. Myths about the baby moon or the half-baked mountains. Some of them might more truly be called travellers' tales, as being curious but contemporary tales brought from certain borderlands of experience, such as miraculous cures or those that bring whispers of what has happened to the dead. Many of them are probably true tales. Enough of them are probably true to keep a person of real common sense more or less conscious that there really is something rather marvellous behind the cosmic curtain. But in this sense, it is only going by appearances, even if the appearances are called apparitions. It is a matter of appearances and disappearances. At the most, those gods are ghosts. That is, they are glimpses. For most of us, they are rather gossip about glimpses. And for the rest, the whole world is full of rumours, most of which are almost avowedly romances. The great majority of the tales about gods and ghosts and the invisible king are told, if not for the sake of the tale, at least for the sake of the topic. They are evidence of the eternal interest of the theme. They're not evidence of anything else, and they're not meant to be. They are mythology or the poetry that is not bound in books or bound in any other way.
So that's where he's kind of summarizing the chapter on man and mythology, that the imaginative effort to reach this mysterious reality that ends up in various tales that are contradictory sometimes and so on. Okay.
Meanwhile, the minority, the sages or thinkers, had withdrawn apart and had taken up an equally congenial trade. They were drawing up plans of the world which all believed to have a plan. They were trying to set forth the plan seriously and to scale. They were setting their minds directly to the mind that had made the mysterious world, considering what sort of a mind it might be and what its ultimate purpose might be. Some of them made that mind much more impersonal than mankind has generally made it. Some simplified it almost to a blank. A very few, doubted it altogether. One or two of the more morbid fancied that it might be evil and an enemy. Just one or two of the more degraded in the other class worshipped demons instead of gods. But most of these theorists were theists, and they not only saw a moral plan in nature, but they generally laid down a moral plan for humanity.
So that's where I wanted you to conclude this. But so he's got the myth makers and the philosophers, and basically he's summarizing several philosophies here in just a word or two. But there it is. He summarized that first part of the book, chapters. So now I'd like to go to 4 lines. Let's see where I'm. Fourth line of the new. Oh, 266, the new paragraph at the bottom. Okay. To 267, line 1. That's the kind of short.
Okay. Right in the middle of all these things stands up an enormous exception. It is quite unlike anything else. It is a thing final, like the trump of doom, though it is also a piece of good news, or news that seems too good to be true. It is nothing less than the loud assertion that this mysterious maker of the world has visited his world in person. It declares that really, and even recently, or right in the middle of historic times, there did walk into the world this original invisible being, about whom the thinkers make theories and the mythologists hand down myths. The man who made the world.
Okay, so that is where in part 2 he shows that coming of Christ fulfills these presages, if you will, or foreshadowings of the concreteness of a myth, but the, so to speak, abstract truth of philosophy. So, Joseph, for the new paragraph at the bottom of the page, up to 2 lines on the next page, 268.
Okay. It came on the world with a wind and rush of running messengers proclaiming that apocalyptic portent, and it is not unduly fanciful to say that they are running still. What puzzles the world and its wise philosophers and fanciful pagan poets about the priests and people of the Catholic Church is that they still behave as if they were messengers. A messenger does not dream about what his message might be, or argue about what it probably would be. He delivers it as it is. It's not a theory or a fancy, but a fact.
So it's not philosophy or mythology, but a fact. Okay.
It is not relevant to this intentionally rudimentary outline to prove in detail that it is a fact, but merely to point out that these messengers do deal with it as men deal with a fact. All that is condemned in Catholic tradition, authority, and dogmatism, and the refusal to retract and modify, are but the natural human attributes of a man with a message relating to a fact.
And then there's 2 of the short passages I'll read because it's easier to read than to describe where they are. A few lines down on page 268. The religion of the world, in its right proportions, is not divided into fine shades of mysticism or more or less rational forms of mythology. It is divided by the line between the men who are bringing that message and the men who have not yet heard it or cannot believe it. So that's, as Lewis would talk about in his chapter on Christianity and religion. And then on page 269, lines 3 and 4, nobody else except those messengers has any gospel. Nobody else has any good news, for the simple reason that nobody else has any news. So mythology is not new. Philosophy is not new, but this combining of the myth into fact and philosophic truth is new. And then the paragraph in the middle of the page there, for this is the last proof of the miracle that something so supernatural should become so natural. I mean, that anything so unique when seen from the outside should only seem universal when seen from the inside. And then finally, I want to conclude this entire conclusion and reading, Joseph, on page 270, line 9, where it starts at the end of the line there. I have admitted freely that, to the end of the conclusion.
Okay. I have admitted freely that, considering the incident in itself, a man who says he is God may be classed with a man who says he is glass. But the man who says he is glass is not a glazier making windows for all the world. He does not remain for after ages as a shining and crystalline figure in whose light everything is as clear as crystal. But this madness has remained sane. The madness has remained sane when everything else went mad. The madhouse has been a house to which, age after age, men are continually coming back as to a home. That is the riddle that remains, that anything so abrupt and abnormal should still be found a habitable and hospitable thing. I care not if the skeptic says it is a tall story. I cannot see how so toppling a tower could stand so long without foundation. Still less can I see how it could become, as it has become, the home of man. Had it merely appeared and disappeared, it might possibly have been remembered or explained as the last sleep of the rage of illusion, the ultimate myth of the ultimate mood, in which the mind struck the sky and broke. But the mind did not break. It is the one mind that remains unbroken in the breakup of the world. If it were an error, It seems as if the error could hardly have lasted a day. If it were a mere ecstasy, it would seem that such an ecstasy could not endure for an hour. It has endured for nearly 2,000 years, and the world within it has been more lucid, more level headed, more reasonable in its hopes, more healthy in its instincts, more humorous and cheerful in the face of fate and death than all the world outside. For it was the soul of Christendom that came forth from the incredible Christ, and the soul of it was common sense. Though we dared not look on his face, we could look on his fruits, and by his fruits we should know him. The fruits are solid, and the fruitfulness is much more than a metaphor, and nowhere in this sad world are boys happier in apple trees, or men in more equal chorus singing as they tread the vine, than under the fixed flash of this instant and intolerant enlightenment, the lightning made eternal as the light.
I have nothing more to say. Thank you, Joseph. That was a beautiful reading of a beautiful text
Mhm.
that sums up a beautiful book.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you next session for another wonderful book, The Wedding of Magdeburg. God bless you.